In this episode of What is Life, my philosophical conversation is with a Catholic theologian whose name is Ilia Delio. She's a prominent academic. She's written many award-winning books, and I'm particularly interested in her ideas because she's been profoundly influenced by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest, also a scientist, and he developed a real pioneering evolutionary spirituality which sought to unite science and spirituality, which I think is a precursor for my own, which also is attempting to unite science and spirituality. It's just I don't know as much about it as I probably should. So this was a real opportunity for me to learn about Tia's ideas, how they've influenced Ilia, and to find the similarities and differences between my own understanding and the understanding that he was presenting. And it's interesting to reach across to someone in the Catholic tradition, which I do, but not very much, and to see how rich it is. And there's a lovely irony in the conversation that you're heading into, where at the end I find myself in a conversation with a Catholic theologian where I'm the one arguing for the existence of life after death. So you're in for a great ride. And I hope you really enjoy it. But before we go, I just want to leave you with a quote, because you may think I've never heard of Teilhard de Chardin, but you may have heard this quote, because it's very famous. There's many famous quotes from him, actually. And it's beautiful. And at the end of our conversation, we both agree it's one of our favourite quotes. So as we head off into this philosophical journey, I wanted to leave you with these lines from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was the sort of man that could leave us with this vision. He says, "Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides and gravity, we will harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire." Beautiful. Hello. Thank you for joining me for this conversation. The idea behind this series is really to capture authentic exploration, really.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of reaching out to people who I feel, like myself, have probably spent their whole lives looking at what the hell is this that we're in? What's this experience of being alive?
Mm-hmm.
And these conversations really are about comparing notes and actually questioning, finding out from each other, questioning each other. Now, I have to confess up front, I mean, I really want to connect with you, Ilia, and hear what you made of this.
Yeah.
But I have another motivation, which is better if you know, and it's better if I say it now, which is I was talking to a friend of mine who is a Catholic priest in Ireland, who invited me across there to do some work with his amazing group of explorers. And I was talking to him about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who people keep telling me, and the little I know, I really, really resonate with what he says. So I was looking for also somebody who'd been profoundly influenced by him. And Miles suggested yourself. And so that's why I reached out and went, I wonder if you'd have a conversation with me.
Just Mrs. Teilhard de Chardin, or Sister Teilhard. Yes, he is very influential. I'd be happy to share. I've done a lot of work with Teilhard, actually, and I run a website called the Omega Center, which is it's focused, using Teilhard's key ideas on God and evolution and the energies of love to build up a new understanding of the God-world relationship and the place of the human person in that unfolding dynamic world. So a lot of my blogs and stuff are there. And then I've written a number of books on this stuff. Continue to work building on what my whole thing is, building on Teilhard for the 21st century.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, well, let's just dive in straight with that, Ilia. I mean, the question that I framed around this series is, what is life? Or, it's the biggest question I can come up with, life, the universe, and everything, as the famous joke goes. How would you describe your understanding of what we're experiencing?
The present crisis?
No, sorry. I mean much more generally. We could go for that, but I just mean the whole crisis. From birth to death.
Crisis, yeah, I mean, it's a good starting point, actually, because it's what we're not doing. And I think the crisis is problematic of a radical disconnect, not just of humans to humans, but humans to earth, and religion to science. And I think we have been in this kind of quagmire, rather sort of a suspended, mental state of kind of Cartesian life, where we have a thinking self and then some material self, but we don't know how these selves might actually fit together. And we built a world around, I think, a compartmentalized existence. And I think that is how we have run in, and we're going to run into more pandemics. This is just the beginning, because this is about 400 years in the making, or 500 years in the making. I don't think this pandemic is a recent, some little thing in Wuhan, China. This is emblematic and problematic of lifestyles and capitalism, and the way consumerism has filled in a lot of what was once the place of religion. So I think consumerism, technology, these have, in a sense, filled in the gaps where religion has sort of failed, so to speak, to really animate our lives. And that's where I think Teilhard is very helpful, because he saw very early on that unless we get, religion back to, the physical universe and evolution in particular, he said, we're going to run into real problems up ahead. And he did say at one point, writing back in the 1940s, that we could face annihilation if we do not understand the role of religion in evolution.
Yes, I very much resonate with the essential message with that, because what I'm hearing, when you said about compartmentalization, I think the thing which attracts me to what I've read of what you've said and what Teilhard's saying is, it feels like this amazing idea of that the whole universe is a process, that the whole universe is evolving. That feels like the narrative that can hold everything together if we can understand it in a deep enough way, including spirituality, religion, and science.
Right, and that's exactly right. And by saying it's a process, that kind of statement is very consonant with what science is telling us about the physical universe. And I think, we have really we have allowed science to become a highly specialized discipline, and we've exonerated ourselves from paying attention to what science has been telling us about the physical universe and about matter. And therefore, we have sort of allowed ourselves to be swept up into all sorts of philosophies and theologies that have little to do with the physical world, And so process is, how cosmic biological life, for sure, right? It works according to systems and not according to individual entities. So relationality is the operative word of life itself.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting. You've jumped straight with that word. I would say, from the way that it looks to me now, one of the ways I describe this is the one in relationship to itself. That's what it feels it is. That it's one thing in a infinite relationships with itself through everything, including you and me.
Yes, right.
And then all of, space, time, energy, these are all relationships.
Absolutely. Like early on, you can, one of the people that I look to is David Bohm and his notion of implicate order, and that was one of Bohm's key ideas, that it's deep relationality through and through. And he said, at one point, we seem separate. And he said, but that's more of an illusion. In our cosmic roots, he says, we're part of an indivisible whole, and we all share in the same cosmic process. Meaning, if you trace, human life back to its cosmic roots, its very fundamental roots, then it is an entangled whole of energy. That's really what we are in our very rootedness. And so it's very interesting the way evolution has proceeded toward more complexified life. That if we move from the Big Bang onwards, we see this almost irresistible force towards greater complexity, meaning towards greater degrees of relationality, which is what complexity really is in terms of, and then the flow of life in terms of information is across, relational lines, so that as life complexifies, consciousness seems to rise. I mean, that's something that Teilhard noted, but then, Wolfgang Pauli noted, Planck, a lot of the early physicists noted this as well. And so that's very interesting. If we are one, what is it about, Teilhard was, well, what drives this? Why do we complexify? I mean, that's a huge question that science has not answered at all. Why does this thing keep moving? And where are we moving toward? And of course, many scientists would, discredit that there's direction in evolution. Evolution is just a process. But you can't help but notice, we are Homo sapiens sapiens, right? We're not Neanderthals, we're not Australopithecines, so there's something about biological life that keeps irresistibly moving towards something. And that really is what grabbed Teilhard, and the question is toward what? If there is there a goal is there something that's pulling us? If we are all one, why don't we just kind of rest in that? Why don't we just kind of settle into our oneness? And there's something there that's not just of materiality alone. And that's what's interesting about the whole thing. Why don't we just hang out with nature and feel at peace with ourselves, with one another, and, learn to get along and be compassionate and kind and peaceful. And yet, no, we're brain downloading where, we want to become something more than ourselves. We're not happy with ourselves. Technology is, certainly in the transhumanist side of things, is like, no, you don't have to suffer. You don't have to die. You don't even have to be unhappy. We're going to, implant chips in you. We're going to brain download you. We're going to, improve you all around. Well, why? Why do we need to be improved if we are already part of this cosmic wholeness? So these are some of the things that sort of drove Teilhard to think there's something else going on here. If this is it, if it truly is just materiality, self-sufficient materiality, it doesn't seem to be at home with itself, or nature's at home with itself. We're not at home with ourselves, so it's kind of interesting, just, from the point, bracketing any theological perspective here. It's just very interesting from a philosophical perspective, what drives being toward more being.
Well, all right, I'll have a stab at saying what I see, and you tell me if this is anything close to what you see.
Okay.
What I see is, when I look at the moment, I see that the nature of time, if you like, change, whatever you call that, is such that every moment realizes a new possibility that's never happened before. And it's built on and implicit within it is the previous moment. So that this moment now is a new moment, but contains within it implicitly all of the past.
Mm-hmm.
So the past hasn't gone anywhere. It's right here. It's implicitly here. So that you've had what, at least the last 13.8 billion years, who knows what before that, but for the 13.8 billion years of the universe, there's been a process in which something which I just call being, which exists and has no qualities, is taking on every quality. And each moment seems to be the realization of potentiality on a greater level, based on what's happened before. So that the very motor towards emergence and complexity, but not just complexity, because sometimes it simplifies, but is still more emergent, is because it contains within it everything. A bit like you and me, we've got older, we've been around the block, and we've got everything we've ever experienced in us, is what we are. And therefore, we have a more emergent perspective than maybe when we were 15.
I would definitely agree with your position, Tim. I do think, it's kind of interesting, the whole question of time, does time create us, or do we create time? I do think the role of consciousness here plays a really, and consciousness, I think, is a key element to the whole kit and caboodle. Two things I would point out: consciousness and creativity. I think the ground of this becoming is the dynamism of creativity itself. And so there's something about creativity and the rise of consciousness that speaks to this emergent process, right? That everything we are in this moment is taken up into the next moment, but with a whole new level of consciousness and creativity, right? We don't lose what we were before, but we're not what we were in the previous, in the previous moment. So there's
when
something.
You say it has more consciousness, you talk about that just in the biological sphere, or do you see consciousness right the way through? What do you mean by consciousness?
I don't think we can separate human consciousness from cosmic consciousness. So I take consciousness as that awareness which is supported by a flow of information due to I think just, I see, let me just put it this way. I see a relationship between consciousness, information, and relationality.
Oh, me too. I love those three words, especially information and relationality.
Mm-hmm.
They're big words for me. Go on.
Right. So, I mean, how many people are working on the problem of consciousness, right? We don't know what exactly it is. And is it something as fundamental as space-time, or is it something? Is it a thing?
I think it's a relationship.
I think it is too. I think, again, the question of consciousness is fundamental, because how we understand consciousness, I think, is how we understand this emergent process of life. There's something, you can't get away from consciousness, right? There's nothing you can talk about in terms of emergent biological life apart from consciousness. So there's a fundamental reality of consciousness that drives all of life. And so, we can't talk about matter apart from consciousness. We can't even talk about ourselves apart from consciousness. We can't talk about God apart from consciousness. So there's something about consciousness that is, the Hindus kind of point to this, where there's notion of pure consciousness, or Buddhism with his notion of, kind of getting to that pure state of consciousness. So there's something that the Eastern religions, I think, tapped into, centuries ago that we might just be discovering in a whole new way.
So I'm going to slightly divert us, if you don't mind, Ilia. I would like to go back to that. And it's partly because I've just made a major transition, and people have heard me talk about it an awful lot recently, from someone who thought that based on Eastern spirituality to someone who doesn't think that anymore.
Okay, good.
And I have a very different take on consciousness than the one that I've put in most of my 35 books. So basically, I've been busily disagreeing with myself, and it's a kind of a humbling process. But would like to return to that. But I just want to get clarity on a few things that you feel perhaps, and certainly what Tia was saying, that. So when I look at the evolutionary process, to me, the problem that science has, to me, is reductionism. That it wants to reduce the more emergent to the less emergent, whereas the new scientific narrative is the opposite. It's emergent. It goes, look, there's that and more, and it can't be reduced. There's that and more. And that process has gone from 10 billion years of matter to 4 billion years of life evolving, and then it's ended up with psyche, soul, the psyche, the thing that we're connecting in right now, the non-material imaginal space. Now, that's very important to me, because that's how you can pull together spirituality, which is concerned with the imaginal space, the non-physical, and I want to assert the reality of that, not as a byproduct of anything, but as a reality in its own right. Now, I'm aware that Tia has this phrase, the noosphere.
Yes.
Now, I have this phrase, the imaginos, because it's like the cosmos and the imaginos. And that one is made of imaginal information and has arisen from the physical and biological realms, which are made of physical and biological information.
Right.
So I'd like to know what you made of his idea of the noosphere and what that means to you.
So Teilhard's noosphere is that layer of what he called thinking mind, or we can call the higher layer of consciousness, but it's not something distinct from the biosphere.
Oh, okay.
So it emerges from out of the biosphere and is a continuation of it. So it's a continuation of biogenesis on a higher level of life, now on the level of thinking mind. And so new Genesis is just really, I would just put it as higher levels of consciousness, of biological life.
So he sees that as an effect of biology, or as
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, he sees the new Genesis emerging out of biological life and a continuation with it. So he would not posit. I mean, I'd see sometimes that people have this noosphere as something that's a thinking layer that's broken off from biogenesis. We don't need the biosphere anymore. Now we have, the mind. That's definitely not what he's saying, because he holds the whole thing together in this notion of Christogenesis. The whole thing is this personal presence of God Omega. He sees this power of divinity, as the power of love and conscious love, you might say, driving the whole thing.
Okay, so that's the idea of the omega point, or the Christ.
Yeah.
So
correct.
So how does that link to the noosphere? Say what that is, and for you, and how that links to the noosphere.
So I think, the omega point, I think, is misunderstood often. I think people see it as a point of arrival, as if you've arrived at the North Pole, like welcome to the omega point. The omega point is that point in cosmic life where consciousness is maximized. And of course, by that, we mean the maximization of consciousness is the full disclosure or realization of God, right? So Teilhard never mixes God. He doesn't collapse God, into materiality, but neither is God separate from materiality. So he holds God and world in this complementary relationship. They need each other. They are, in a sense, inseparable, but they're distinct. So he has
sorry, Ilia, what does he mean by God?
He means by God that personal presence of, I would put it this way, the personal presence of life at the heart of life. In other words, traditionally the creator, but he very rarely uses that language of
But it is a creator. It is the creator. Is it the Big Bang? Is the button is pressed by God? Is that the kind of?
No. Yeah. So prayer would never discredit science. In other words, he would never collapse like the Big Bang, and God said, "Let there be light."
Yeah.
That's just bad theology and bad science. Right?
Okay. Good. Yes, I agree.
So God is always the infinite horizon, the ground. When we use the word ground of being, the necessary ground. In other words, that which no greater can be thought. The Anselmian idea that that which is the unlimited horizon of all limited existence, because even the infinite of created existence is always finite, right? So you can have the finite infinite, so to speak, but God is that which is beyond the infinite. So I would take God as the beyond anything that we say about creation. For Teilhard, God is that personal absolute. Absolute is a good word here because it connotes something that has no contingent boundaries, right? To the absolute ground or the absolute horizon of being itself is God.
And you said earlier that's going. This I'm intrigued by is that it was going to the full realization of that.
Yeah, because God, if we take God as love, the absolute being in love. Well, love is the fullness of consciousness, right? The absolute being of love is the absolute being of consciousness itself. So love and consciousness are not two separate poles. They're actually, it's like matter itself. They're two dimensions of the same reality. And I think when Teilhard talks about the omega point, he is talking about coming into that full realization, that full consciousness of being in love. So in other words, as we grow into our, what we are, and here, omega is the source of infinite creativity, potentialities to grow ever more into this higher consciousness of being in love. So that it's not just pure awareness, it's a pure awareness of being personally centered in one other than oneself, and yet the very source of oneself. So
does that, so let me just, if I can, I'll try and do it briefly, but just paint you a picture of the narrative that I've been exploring. and you tell me whether that sounds similar or whether there's some fundamental differences there.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so for me, it troubles me to put God at the beginning. And the reason that for that, and I mean, obviously I used to, like everyone, and there's been a switch for me because it feels like the parsimonious thing is to start with the bare minimum. And the bare minimum is not a conscious loving God. That feels like a lot. Whereas if I start with what's the quality that everything's got? Oh, it's all got being. Okay, so let's start with, that's the simplest thing I can possibly imagine, is just being, taking form. And the jump for me was, and it came actually from the idea of God is Alpha and Omega, which I wasn't to do with Teilhard for me. It was from the Gospel of Thomas, I think. But it was what started to dawn on me whenever it was 10 years ago, whatever, was that I have a relationship, I have since all my life, with a being of love that is God. But philosophically, if God created all of this, I want words, because this is a mess. And
I would agree.
And really, it's like he's not very nice, and I've got trouble. But if, on the other hand, the universe is flowering into God, that God is the most emergent thing, not the least, but the most emergent. That really works for me.
Yeah, that's absolutely. You're right in line with what Teilhard was thinking as well, quite honestly. Fantastic. So the term that Teilhard used is theogenesis. And, it's a term.
That's what he uses. I've got to write that down. That is so good. Correct.
And his line of thinking, now I don't know if he was in touch with Carl Jung, but his line of thinking is very much along with Carl Jung posited as theogenesis as well. The incarnation is this emergence of God in evolution. And, as we emerge through consciousness, this being is, in a sense, emerging in and through us as that fullness of conscious being in love itself. So God is not, like, ta-da, here I am. And then he makes his creation, and then it's such a mess, and then you go, what kind of God is this anyway? Like, God having a bad hair.
What's with the dinosaurs, God?
So I take God as, so actually I'm about to start a book called The God Revolution, and it's just exactly that. I want to really, and the way I'm gonna, I think, approach this is, rather than seeing, so the name God, I think, is it kind of throws us off because the name is singular, and it points us to, like, we constantly have this imaging of something bigger than ourselves, when in fact God is relationality itself. The Trinity is the symbol of divine relationality. And so what Teilhard brought together was what he called trinitization and theogenesis. Now, if I were to just put this in a shorthand term, so it's the old Greek idea, the many becoming one, or Whitehead's idea, the many become one and are increased by one. And I take that as the very process of trinitization itself, that God is becoming God in and through this creation. So that creation is not something outside God or something God decided to do because God was bored with divine life, but creation is essential to God's godness, so that God is becoming God in and through this creation, so that Trinity is not this fully enclosed community of, two birds and a dove or something. I don't know, the three guys having a tea party. That is deep relationality. And we are, I have a paper here by Jakob Böhm, the German, and he talks about quaternization. Again, this is not a completely novel idea. Other mystics have talked about, this, and it makes a lot of sense. Trinity, just symbolically speaking, is an asymmetric number, although, like, the medievalists always made it symmetrical, like there's two ends and then a center. But you can also see it as this, like it's an openness. You have two with an open third. And therefore, if this is God, the openness of God, then God is always seeking that completion in an other. So the otherness of creation is in itself, contributing to that ever fullness of God. So in some way, we become, in a sense, the fourth dimension of the Trinity, which means so cosmic life, right? Cosmic as wholeness, the whole of life would include creation in the fulfillment of God's godness.
So one of the phrases, and again, it was just, I presume everyone has it, and you have it too. Something, you think something, and then you suddenly see everything in a whole new way. And one of the little phrases which kicked off for me in this process was going, maybe the communion of souls. It's not the communion of souls around God; it's the communion of souls is God, and that as we come into this deep communion with each other. As we make the transition, the language I'm using these days is from individuals to unividuals, individuals who are one with the universe.
Right.
We come into communion with, and the universe knows itself through us, or the being knows itself through us. We're coming into a deep communion with, and I wish I had a word for God, because I love the word God actually, because it goes back in time, but it's also difficult, like you said, and it feels like the only description I can come up with is that it's a trans-immanent spirit, because it's, or being, that it transcends, but it's immanent, it is the whole thing. Correct. And the image that I get for the evolution is a bit like, well, very simplistic, but this body was once a fertilized egg. Right. And and it's gone, and then it's a body, and then a psyche, and then it's off in this other realm where it's just, and it feels like that's what the universe has done, isn't it? And, it doesn't start with this conscious, right, I know what I'm doing. It might get there eventually, and that we're growing into it, and that we are somehow, our individuality is key to that process. It's not, this is where I differ now from the traditions of the East that I was very involved with when I was younger, where the individuality is seen as in the way. Yeah, right, and is absorbed in that. Key, it's not, because the individuality is what allows the oneness to become conscious. Yeah. Yeah. I would definitely agree. Yeah. No. And there's where Teilhard. So your ideas, I don't know if you've read, but your ideas are very consonant with Teilhard. Yeah. I haven't really. No, and I should. So I use the word person a lot because, like you, there is something about the distinct person, right? So rather than individual, always connotes for me something that's separate. It can connote something separate and distinct, but I like person because it really means more relational. A person is a relational being. But Teilhard, and here's the interesting thing. There is no universe. How can we talk about a universe apart from a conscious person? We can't, so we are the universe, right? On the level of self-thinking, of self-reflective consciousness. That's Teilhard's, say that again, Ilia. I want to make sure I've got what you just said. I'm not sure I did. How can we talk about? We talk about the universe as it's something out there, distinct from us, but there's no way to talk about a universe apart from us. There's no way we can experience the universe apart from us, for sure. Well, if you don't experience it. But can't we talk about it the pre-human universe? Isn't that coherent to talk about the pre-human? But universe? We're the ones who have studied pre-human life, right? Sure. So we can, so it requires us to have done that. But the thing we're positing there is that there was a time when the universe, what existed, the one in relationship to itself, in my language, but that relationality was not, it wasn't to do with consciousness or concepts or the imagination. It was a different sort of relationality. But that's also our origin as well, right? So definitely, yes. That's the whole point. So okay, I'm not getting it. I don't think I'm getting what you're saying. So have another go. Yeah, so that origin, right, of what we call pre-conscious, simple molecular life, is our origin. Yep. So that's us on a much, that's our life, basically. Oh, I see what you're saying. So we are the whole thing now, of course. What else could we be? Right. And so that's all in us. Yes.
right? That the universe, we are the universe now on the level of self-thinking thought.
Yes.
And we are, in a sense, we are open to this now, this realm of divinity, this realm of absolute, being and love that we name as God. So what Raymond Ponikar called the cosmotheandric whole, which is
say that again.
The cosmotheandric whole. Cosmotheandric. In other words, cosmos, theos, and anthropos or andros are interlocking realities that cannot be separated. So Ponikar says this is the real Trinity. The whole structure of existence is Trinitarian in this emergent cosmotheandric wholeness. It's never been anything other than even our anthropic dimension of this. It goes back, we can trace it back to 13.8 billion years, but it's emergent, right? So the whole thing is an emergent process of interlocking realities, and it's moving towards something, in and through us, right, into this fullness of cosmotheandric life, which is,
So can I just I want to not lose the thing about the noosphere, if you're all right with that, Ilia. I'd like to take us back to this a second in the light of everything we've now talked about. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and also what you thought Teilhard's position was, or his understanding that he came to, is about life after death.
Life after death, yeah. He didn't write much about death. In fact, very little. But I think...
That's interesting. Isn't that interesting? Huh.
Yeah, it is, actually.
That's puzzling, both as a Catholic and also as just as a human being. I think it's one of the questions which is pretty important to any philosophy.
I think it's an essential question, and that I don't think, quite honestly, how to put this in a good way, we don't talk about death sufficiently enough as an integral component of the emergent, process of life itself.
Yes.
And yet we know from a biological perspective, death is written through all the layers of evolution, that without death, evolution really would not be possible, right? Because we wouldn't have even biologically the resources possible for more complex life to emerge.
So his whole thing with the noosphere and all of that, it wasn't anything to do with, it was purely, okay, so that's quite different to me. Okay.
Yes, right. He, even in his essays on the future of man, not very much. It's not prominent. The subject of death is not prominent.
And how would other people who have a Catholic perspective, or any of those perspectives that like his, how would they integrate that with an evolutionary, or with Teilhard's ideas, or just a general evolutionary idea? I
think, I've always liked Karl Rahner's notion of death as the first act of real freedom. In other words, our whole process of life is sort of a development of who we are, a growing into who we are. And in that moment of death, in a sense, who we are is sort of, it's the beginning of our final, definition of life. It's what we leave. It's what we impart. It's what we contribute to the whole, in a sense, by joining with the whole.
Am I getting the feeling that here, this me, who's really a kind of secularist, I guess, and you, who I understand as a Catholic, I'm the one who believes in life after death and not you? Is that true?
No, actually, I do believe in life after death, and I think, okay, my whole view on life after death is, I think the name God points to ongoing dynamic love of creative life, and that we join in that love in a whole new way, in a way that we are fully conscious of it. It's a fullness of engaging in conscious love with the ongoing creativity of life. I think, I don't think we ever really see God face. I think God is always the beyond, and so we're always drawn into we will always be drawn into that dynamism of love. And I think just, death is where we are not bound by our limitations or our contingencies or our sufferings, that there's a transformation of what we are. But I do think, here's what I want to say, is the core of what we are, or what we make of our lives in this life, is sort of what we then are for the eternity of our lives. In other words, I think we contribute to the universe and to the whole of cosmic life, that ongoing creativity of life, what we make in our particular lives in this earthly journey. So, in other words, the life well lived, how we love, how we forgive, how we live in peace, it shapes our core personality and the contribution of that personality to the whole of ongoing creative life. So it makes a difference how we live. In other words, if death were just like the next world's going to be a lot better than this one, which is sort of a common way of Catholics talk about heaven, like I can't wait to go to heaven because it'll be so much better than here. But heaven is here, open to its fullness in God. That's the whole point. Heaven is not another world, like it's not like a train station. You go from earth to heaven, but heaven is that openness of earth to that ongoing, to the infinite horizon of love, that is God. And so I think our earthly lives make a huge difference. So it makes it like every moment, of how we're living in this life. I think
this is sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, finish. I was just going to say, it just seems so ironic to me, how beautiful, because I want to argue for the existence of heaven to a Catholic.
Oh, do you?
Oh,
really? What's your idea
but I want to
of it?
present it in a new way, maybe.
Okay.
And see, I have a trouble with that. I get that. I love that. Yes. I have real trouble when I'm looking at a 6-month-old baby dying of AIDS, or it's like the fullness of your life will count for the, like, oh, hang on, what's all that? And suddenly it's like none of that works for me. It just and my experience of the love is it's kind of the where we're moving to redeems everything, and that the movement towards it is powerfully redemptive and that's not. So here's a possibility for you, just to try out on you.
Okay.
I'm going to expand on this noosphere idea quite considerably, it sounds like. I thought it might be similar, but it's not.
Okay, good.
What it seems to me has happened is that we've got information on a physical level has given rise to information on a biological level, which has given rise to information on a imaginal level, which is non-physical. Now, obviously, it's linked in with a physicality, but it's primarily not physical. And what's happened is a whole non-physical domain of imagination has opened up. So that and my experience is, if you go into it, if you take ayahuasca or you meditate or you go on journeys, it's huge out there. And the shamanic experiences, and it's like, whoa, this is a whole universe in the imaginal. So what I'm exploring is, so that's the psyche. Psyche is Greek for soul, as you well know, I'm sure. So that's the soul. So here I am experiencing the body and the soul. Everyone is, always. I'm experiencing a physical realm of the senses and a non-physical realm of the imagination, which I think has arisen from it. So the question about life after death becomes, for me, a very simple question, which is, when this stops and sensation ceases, does the imagination also stop? Or, as seems to be suggested by near-death experiences and all of the traditions that have seen life after death, does actually the imagination, the dream level of reality, has that emerged in such a way that it sustains itself, and it doesn't require the lower levels to sustain itself, or at least for a period. So it's able to continue. So that the idea underlying that is that heaven has evolved. A domain which people experience, hundreds of thousands of them in near-death experiences, probably bigger than that now, has itself evolved. And if you look at what intrigues me, if I look at the literature about life after death, you can almost see it evolving. The collective dream space has itself, until now, it's just huge. And so that then, with your point earlier about death being so essential, it feels like, death, once we've got biology, death is central to the evolution of species. Really necessary and really good for the reasons you were saying. But it's disastrous for the evolution of individuals. It's no good for that. And I wonder whether that through that, what's happened is that the universe has evolved onto a level of individuality in which the individual is able to continue evolving. And it's not contingent on the level which was actually a different level of evolution, which is a species evolution.
Well, what if we were to conceive? So there.
Did that make some sense? Did I?
Yeah.
It was very quick. But.
No, it's interesting. But I think we're limiting death here only to physical death. And I think that,
don't you think you just need to start with that? It's like, I mean, the key thing most of us are concerned about with life is, when this dies, what happens to this?
Yeah, I understand. But all I'm going to suggest is that there's maybe another way to look at death.
Okay.
And that is, if I were to look from, say, a Christian spiritual perspective, and here I'm going to take Francis of Assisi as just a case point here.
Okay.
There's something about, so there's two things I'd bring together here. So when I talk about love, I get worried that people think, that everything's going to be good, that everything is like, you love me and I love you and life is beautiful. And when in fact, the highest levels of love are just the opposite, right? The highest level of love is really suffering, right? It's suffering for another. It's willing to give one's life for the sake of another. And so, there's levels of death in love. I mean, death, if you really move through the levels of love, you're moving through the levels of death, right? We move from the you move from the death of the.
Isn't that a very different concept of the word death? Really, isn't that an analogy?
Let me finish.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it sounded like really.
So you do have to. We used to have this saying: you have to die to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Meaning you have to let your ego has to, in a sense, let go. The transformation of the ego is, in a sense, a type of self-death. So Francis had this saying, "Blessed are those who endure the first death," meaning a death to the self-isolated ego. He said, "For the second death will do them no harm," meaning that if we learn to die as a way of, in other words, as we die to self, a type of love that is healing and transformative of life itself emerges. So in a sense, going back to where we began, why is this world so self-isolated, so disconnected from one another? Is because we have really lost, I think, an understanding of love and a love that includes levels of death and suffering. In other words, I can't buy up everything from, it's not just all about me, and neither is heaven just all about me, right? There is something about this letting go of self for the sake of other. It's that, even Teilhard said, it's beyond the ego we must look, if we are really to attain that fullness of Omega. That's really what he's saying. And that's really, I think, what the best of love is. It's a letting go of self for the sake of otherness, which is a death to self, which means if I learn to die in this life, in other words, I learn to let go all along the way because I live for something more than myself, right? I live in other than myself because that's really where I begin to find myself, that other being the God within, the God in you, the God among us. So that death itself, and I think we're facing death every single second of our lives, right? There's no plan here that says, "Oh, sure, Tim, you have about 30 more years, make the best of it." Right? It's the next breath. So we're constantly living in that suspended moment of death and life. And so every moment, therefore, becomes a decision moment. Like how, we're not conscious of it because we're so automated in our lives usually. But really, so the whole spiritual life is a training in love. Can I really, in this moment, let go of my my selfish self, and to be there for another, to be aware of the sufferings of another, that life is not good for about 2 million, billion people on this planet. And so here's what I worry about: a concept of heaven that becomes something other than earth. Because I don't think, and here's where I think Teilhard really was holding out, that the fullness, if we want to talk about the second coming of Christ, the parousia, is not some kind of like Jesus riding in on a cloud. It's where earth really is transformed in love, where, there is then that, diaphanous presence of God living through our lives. How? In the way we love, in the way our eyes are open to our being in and for one another. So that's the full kind of consciousness.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, I kind of think, let's not get into it, it's not important, but I still feel that actually you're using an analogy there. If you say to me, do you want to experience the death of your ego and transcend him, or do you want someone to shoot you?
Yeah.
These are quite different things.
Yes.
But and one's an analogy, really. But let me just clarify, because I completely get that, and especially maybe from the tradition that you've been involved in, which I had. I nearly became a friar, Franciscan, but it was in the Church of England. But that was a very long time ago, when I was very, very young.
Prayers,
and had a, that's another story. But I think for me, it's more about, it's not gonna, I certainly don't think it's about leaving anything behind, but it's more about what's real, and then how does it work? Because I've got this psyche, I'm experiencing it now, and I can go off in it and leave this behind. It doesn't mean that this doesn't matter. If I go off into the visionary state,
right,
or whatever, or into formlessness, or
right,
in particular, and I'm thinking right now of an experience I had last year of being absolutely catapulted into God, just like nothing but God, just light, and no Tim, no world, no form,
wow,
just something beyond anything I'd ever experienced.
Right.
But sounds very resonant with what I hear people talking about in, say, near-death experiences, when they experience the love light.
Right.
Or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where they talk about the clear light of potentiality. And so it's not so much like, we're going to leave this behind. That, I think, is baggage from the past for me.
Okay, good.
I don't carry that.
Yeah,
It's like,
good.
that's just old Christian baggage I haven't got. It's more like, how are these levels all related?
Yes.
And has it blossomed up into this?
Right.
And are we in? So I would probably take a more Eastern approach here.
Yeah.
And go, I wonder whether the mechanism for the evolution has been through many phases, hasn't it? The natural selection is the process for biology. Yeah. It's not the process for the physical universe. That's another form of selection. But then you get natural selection. And then I wonder whether the process which we're now in is more akin to metempsychosis, to the idea of coming into and out of a relationship with a biological sphere. And not because it's irrelevant, but because almost like you can catapult something up from it and then down, and then up and then down. And that this relational aspect is going on between something which is now on a personal or individual journey, with something which is on a more collective journey.
Yeah, no, and in fact, all that you're saying here, if we go back to what we were talking about before in terms of theogenesis, I mean, it's pretty fantastic, isn't it, that one can have this incredible experience of divinity, of divine light, that's beyond any materiality, and yet you are experiencing it. So there's something about you, for the person, that this reality of divine, of immense, incomprehensible divine light shining, the experience of it, and the fact that you're capable of the experience of it tells us something about, the human person, which, again, if we go back to that, is God emerging through our, through us. And again, I've often said, years ago, I once said, the greatest mystery is the human person, because there's a, all right, we are the mystery. There's this unbelievable, openness to what we are capable of, and that, that fullest realization then is, you might say, the presence of God in our own beingness. So all I'm saying, going back to Francis, though, so I think that the mystics had those type of experiences, and it's precise. It only, look, there's two ways. Look, if you don't have that experience, life really is very hard, right? I mean, it's just drudgery and it's just, trying to get up each day and get your leg out of the bed, and and you go, here we go again. And I think it's just dragging through this existence, and hoping. And that's where I think this idea of heaven as another world, like, gee, I hope it's a lot better than this one, because this one really sucks, rather than know that there's something here. And this is where I think spirituality, conversion, transformation of consciousness, all these are ways of saying that all that we hope for is already within us. We have the capacity for moreness already at, here in our life.
The capacity for it. I think that seems more accurate to me. We've got it, like we have the capacity to grow into this. Everyone.
But we also have to help one another. It's not just about me, right? And so I think going back to what Six is telling us, I mean, I look at this world and I think we have come to a world of radical individualism, that it's just about me and my journey and me and this God. And the whole point of it is, no, there's no you apart from me, right? There's no you.
So this is why I'm trying to introduce this new word, which I mentioned earlier. So you've given me an excuse. So I and it feels, because words carry power, as you know. So it feels like, to me, it looks like, look, the individualism has been a continuation of an evolutionary process that's been going on. Everything's been individuating. So what do you know? Human cultures have. And previously, we were kind of asleep in the collective, really. People identified with tribes and all of that. And then people are now not doing that so much. And there's been a price, but it's also been really, really good.
Yeah.
And it feels like now we're more conscious, we can start to unividuate. We can move from individualism to unividualism, whereby we go, oh, my individuality is an expression of the universe. And I just want to add this one other thing, because it seems so key to what you were just saying. It's lovely, because you were talking about Francis, and it took me right back to my mentor, Brother Bernard, who's dead now, who I met, and I was very young. I ran away to this friary, and he became a lifelong friend. And I would shoot off to the east a lot into non-duality, and nothing really exists. Tim doesn't really exist, or Tim is in the way of the oneness, and he would constantly try and bring me back to the person. And I would think, he just doesn't get it, does he? And I look back now and I go, oh, I didn't get it.
He got it.
And he really did. And he and I love that about the Christian tradition. It really has this. So what I wanted to add then was that it feels to me, what I see from the East, which feels wrong, is the idea in the Tibetan Book of the Dead say that with the love light, if you do survive, if the psyche continues, and when I say heaven, I'm not talking about everything's great. I mean the psyche with everything that's entailed. I mean, there's a lot, like the Bardos in it's like, whoa, there's everything. Maybe good, maybe not good, may change, but the psyche, the soul, and that at the depth of reaching up into to consciously know the ground, to know the light of potentiality from which it's all come, and to enter into that communion, which is the completeness of love, because it's the complete communion. That in the East you get this idea that your job, because the individual's in the way, is to dissolve into it like a drop into an ocean.
Absorption.
And which sounds great until you think about it, which means that everything your own individuality is worthless. Whereas it seems to me that the opposite is true, that we enter into it by maintaining our individuality, through it, of this transcendent oneness.
Right.
So that what happened to me last year, I was talking about, my attention went fully into that. So in my attention, there was no Tim, there was no world. But when I came back, there was Tim and the world.
Right.
And that wasn't like, oh, I've lost it. It was like, no, this was the foundation from which I could, for some magic period, reach beyond it. And that kind of redeems the whole evolutionary process somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly. So you should read Teilhard's essay on it's called How I Believe. That's exactly what he thought. And that's why he didn't reject the Eastern religions, but he said they're too acosmic. They're too detached from materiality. There's something about, when we talk about materiality, the particularity of personhood, the particularity of existence, right? This person, this leaf, there's something about that concrete existence that holds, that is open to that fullness. And yet it's back to the old problem of the one and the many, right? The one, right? The one is the ground of the many, and the many is the ground of the one. And there's this kind of, this paradox, this coincidence of opposites, so to speak, that is precisely because of our particularity. And I do love Thomas Merton on this, the seeds of our identity lie in God. Like God has uttered me from all eternity, this word, expressed in this way. And so, what Teilhard realized, and so Teilhard speaks about, another word he uses for evolution is cosmic personalization. Ooh. That the whole universe is becoming like one transhuman, but not in terms of absorption, just the opposite. The transhuman is in the diversity of the particular. It's as if the whole universe is like a stained glass window, and every person is a brilliant cut of glass that shines the divine light in a particular way. And that's the beauty of personhood, right? That the whole of divinity is radiated through this person in this way for all eternity. It's our contribution to the whole of life in the particularity of personhood. And we help, in other words, I think in a sense, going back to the relationality, our job is to help radiate that light in one another, to see, to bring out that good in another person is to love, right? No matter who and what that person is, no matter what their economic status or their language or their culture or their religion or their gender. There's a beauty of divine light that's seeking to shine through there. And that can only shine through when it's experienced and when it's noticed and when it's accepted. And therefore, to liberate the divine light within the human person is, I think, the beginning of heaven, right? That is the beginning of what our life together will be for all eternity, you might say, in this ever ongoing creative love of God.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's a tiny little thought, but I'll just share it with you. And then I want to one of the little things I put it in my last book, Soul Story, which was a tiny little thought, but I liked it. And I think you might like it because it fits with your desire to root it in this, which I really get. It was just the feeling of, if the imagination is heaven, if that's what it is, and hell, but if that's what it is, then, or that whole domain, then every time we find something beautiful, an idea with goodness, and we make it real, we bring a little bit of heaven to earth.
Exactly. That's
exactly right. Every time we do that.
Heaven unfolds within it unfolds in the now, right? Yeah. It's not a future reality, it's a present reality unfolding in the way we awaken to the good, the love within us. Yeah.
The love within us. And Teilhard has had, so first I want to say that I have read a little bit of his work a long time ago, and my feeling is that the way things work, I don't know if this is right, but I think it probably is. That actually, because we are one, and because the psyche is also actually one, the noosphere maybe is because it is that when people think thoughts, they make it easier for people to think the same thoughts later. And my sense always, I have the same thing with Whitehead, who I also didn't study until after, is right, and it's strange because I feel sort of real affection for these men in this case. Just to see their pictures, I just feel like, thank you so much for doing all that thought. And then I'm sure I've been able to stumble into something similar because you just cleared a way for me, and I could just wander in, and it was much easier.
I'm a firm believer in quantum entanglement. So I think their ideas, in other words, the energy of their ideas is still present in the universe. So. And as we read them, we become entangled with their ideas, and therefore, even if we don't read them, there's something about this deep interconnectedness that's,
absolutely,
that's awakening in us. And so I do think that there's, this idea of entanglement, that even though we're separated by, they're dead, we're here, so to speak, and, or they're on that side of the world, we're on this side of the world, that there's something that's, almost like mirror neurons, so to speak. It's emerging in me because it's already thinking in you.
I think that's for me what the imaginos or the noosphere, that's the level, like on the
Yeah.
quantum level, it's there, but it's on this on the psychic level as well. And what I
Right.
love about it is that in my direct experience, it's non-local. I mean, where is it?
Correct.
Where
It's
I
not,
think this idea,
yeah.
I'm already in a non-local domain in
Mhm.
which I feel connected to my dead mum. She's just over there. She's right close
Exactly.
to me always.
Mhm.
You know, I'm connected with my daughter who is physically close over there, but
Mhm.
I just know if something's not right, and all of that. And now we're connected. And then what I
Exactly.
love about this idea of time accumulating rather than passing is it means they're all in me, and now you're in me and I'm in you, because
Right.
this has happened. And
Right.
therefore that entanglement that you talked about so lovely grows and grows and grows, and with it
Yeah.
something beautiful is emerging.
Right. No, really, it's amazing. Yeah.
So,
All right.
well, it's been a delight to have this conversation.
Yes.
One little
Yeah.
thing to just end with. What do you think is the impact now in the community that you witness of Pierre and these ideas? Do you think they've, you know, because he obviously had a hard time in his life with these ideas.
Yeah.
What do you know? And but these, I mean, I think one of his quotes was read out at the marriage of.
Oh, yes. Right.
And
Megan and Harry.
Megan, yeah, whatever
Yeah.
name. And I mean, and what a quote it is. I mean, just
Yeah, it's a great quote. Yeah. No, I think, Teilhard wrote, he was proleptic in his thinking, and he was, prophetic and totally, I think, misunderstood by many, many people. But I think we're coming into the Teilhardian century. And I think as we begin to realize our systems don't really work anymore, our religious institutional systems, are a little bit stifled by, Greek metaphysics still. And I think as we awaken to the need to reconcile science and religion, I think Teilhard's ideas will become more and more rooted in us. And, I keep working to try to develop a vision of the whole. And I think in time it will catch on. Really, I think every evolution takes time, right? And so the
exactly what it takes.
Right, an evolution of a vision doesn't happen like in a week or a month. And we're so used to, we have built a modern world of efficiency, and we expect things to happen, like McDonald's time. I want to drive and move on. And it just doesn't work that way. And so we have to be patient. And know that we're participating in something that's so much more than ourselves, by our own thinking processes, the engagement of ideas, the, trying to grapple with, the meaning of things. That's all part of evolution and now on this level of Homo sapien life. And I think it's the most engaging type of work and the creative work that's necessary. I think we can't just resign ourselves to, well, the systems are failing and I just better go have a party because we may all die tomorrow. The virus is going to take us over, and there it is, all downhill. I think these are all signs, signs of something. Teilhard would read this pandemic as a sign of a breakthrough. Something is trying to break through into our world, and I think that's what we're talking about here. What is that breaking through? In terms of consciousness, life, love, interconnectivity, relationality, and so that's what we're about. Is trying to bring meaning to that. And in time, I do see. I see either religion will have to shift, make a major shift, and take on, in other words, to use Teilhard's terms, a science charged with faith, that science is no longer out, roaming the streets on its own, but now is brought into a deep, integrative field of knowledge with religion. Or as Teilhard would say, we're just going to kill ourselves, basically. And we can do that. We can really kill planetary life and do a great job. I always think, the rest of the world, the rest of nature will say, thank God they're out of here, because those humans really messed us up big time. So nature will go on. God has infinite time. God is timeless time. So from the point of God, it's like, fine, they messed it up.
I do hope not. It feels such a shame, to have got this far. I think that
I would
lot.
agree.
I mean, you look at physics or something today, and we know so much, and you just think,
yeah, I agree. But look, there's also
the universe has come to such a state of knowledge of itself. Just for it to go, oh no, we just messed it up. It's gone.
Yeah, no, but look, there's been great cataclysmic events in evolution.
Of course, of course.
Extinctions, so the Colbert says, and great cataclysmic events. There's nothing that says, hey, there will be another right? So I think the onus is on us. We really got to get our act together. We've got to get our heads out of the clouds. We've got to get, Teilhard thought religion is the vital energy. He saw evolution as multidimensional, and the inner dimension of evolution is religion, not in the institutional sense, but as that energy, that binding energy, that tethering. What tethers us? What are we oriented toward? That's what he meant by that religious dimension of evolution, and we've got to get back to that.
I do. It does feel like religion's not a word I particularly use, but I know exactly what you mean. And
not just spirituality.
Whatever word doesn't really matter. You could talk about the same thing,
right?
For me, the transition, the next transition from individuals to unividuals, however you see that, spirituality is absolutely key. In my own feeling, having lived in the spiritual world of different spiritual worlds since I was a kid, for decades and decades and decades,
right.
is that spirituality is just not up to it, and I would like to do my best before I go to get it up to it, because it feels we need a trans-scientific spirituality.
Right. We do.
We need to be bigger than it, include it, and then play this role. And,
exactly.
And when I ended my TED talk last year in Berkeley, with thinking, imagine taking someone from 400 years ago when science was just being born and show them this.
Yeah.
Well, I think the transition that can happen with a trans-scientific spirituality could have an even bigger impact. It could. That's why I love that quote from Teilhard, of that when we discover the power of love.
Yeah. Then we'll have discovered fire.
It'll be like discovering fire. I mean, it's like, wow. And that feels like that's why this matters.
I agree. Totally. 100%. It's a favorite saying of mine as well.
Is mine too. Isn't it beautiful?
And I always think, that's what I want to be. I want to be a new fire on this earth. I want to set the world ablaze. Yeah.
So there's one last story I want to just check out with you. I don't know if you know it, but I just thought it'd be a nice place to draw a conversation to an end.
Sure.
Which is, I think it was Jean Houston told the story. Was it? And which she'd met him when in New York Park when she was very small, had no idea who he was, mispronounced his name, found out that all later.
Yeah.
And she asked him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm a pilgrim from the future."
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
And it just feels like, here we are after the man's death, both of us, it sounds like, trying to do the same thing.
Yes.
Creating this thing which he was a prophet for.
Absolutely.
So ahead of his time.
Yeah.
And that's a lovely thing. Yeah. A pilgrim from the future.
I love that. I love that saying. Yeah. It's a good note to conclude. We'll be pilgrims of the future to get entangled.
Bringing the fire of love. Excellent.
Great.
It's been such a delight to spend this time with you, Ilia, and to enjoy your soul and it's been beautiful. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to meet you.
Great. All right. I'll be in touch. God bless.
Peace. Okay.